Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. So today, as you must already know, we are celebrating World Environment Day. And the theme that was set for this year is Time for Nature. So we're really happy that you're joining us because we'll be talking about Indigenous land stewardship, urban agriculture, local biodiversity, and protecting our water systems and our Great Lakes. So as you're joining us and as you're listening to our speakers, we're going to have performances as well. You might have questions, and we're actually going to be taking questions at the end. So you can use the YouTube comment section to give us feedback and especially questions that we can ask. You can also interact with us on Twitter using the hashtag biodiversity, since this is what we're celebrating tonight, or hashtag World Environment Day. Before we start, my wonderful co-host Amina Attar will be greeting you and doing a land acknowledgement for us. Hi, Amina.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm a student at U of T, and I'm also part of a youth environmental advocacy organization. I'm also thankful to Climate Fast, who are hosting this event today. And I'm very excited to be here. So something that I reflect on often and something that has a meaning that's continuously changing for me according to the events happening around the world and in so-called Canada is our land acknowledgement. It is quite important to recognize the land that we are on, the history that it carries, and our varying relationships to it. Certainly, now is the time to value our land. We wish to acknowledge this land on which we are holding this UN Environmental Day. For thousands of years, this land has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this land is the meeting place and a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We also acknowledge the privilege we have of online space and the importance of using it to uplift voices and recognize the struggles that continue today of Indigenous people in Turtle Island. So currently, news feeds are dominated with the outrageous and saddening events that have occurred during the past few weeks that are greatly reminiscent of the long-standing racism that is entrenched in our institutions. In this space, not only will we remember the names and the families of those who have passed, George Floyd, Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Chantel Moore, but we will also make a commitment to being anti-racist. What does it mean to be anti-racist? Beyond not being racist, it's about taking steps to reflect on how terms you or others may use demean or look down on Black or Indigenous people. What are some assumptions you might make? What are some moments where you choose not to speak up because you don't want to make the situation worse? How do you treat people of color? So these are reflections that you will be thinking about or you should be thinking about. So please take the time today or tomorrow or sometime very soon to make a commitment to learn how to be anti-racist, to start your journey or continue your journey, and really recognize that this is a process that is lifelong. Now, we will hold a moment of silence for those impacted by the systemic racism that exists in our institutions, and also recognize that we cannot achieve climate justice without also working on achieving racial justice.
Thank you for taking this moment of silence with us. Hopefully you were able to reflect on the words Amina just shared with you and make that commitment in your head that Amina offered that you make. As you're joining us and maybe you're just trickling in, we're going to celebrate biodiversity today through Indigenous knowledge, through knowledge of the land and all the species on it. And you might have questions for speakers that you can ask. You might also think, who are these wonderful people speaking? How do I get to know more about them? And this is where Climate Fast, so the people hosting this event tonight, have a website where all the bios are on there. And you can also volunteer for Climate Fast by going on their website. So I encourage you, maybe a little later tonight, to go on the Climate Fast website, just type in Climate Fast on Google, and you will be able to find all that information and how to join. So without further ado, let's start this event by asking ourselves, what is biodiversity? And for that, we have a video by the Worldwide Fund for Nature, so WWF, that you might have heard about, that will play right now.
Biodiversity is a term that represents the total variety of all life on Earth. That's a big thing to sum up. Thousands of different wild habitats, millions of different species, billions of different individuals, and the trillions of different characteristics they all have. The total biodiversity of our planet is immense, which is a good thing, because the more biodiversity, the more secure all life on Earth is, including ourselves. Only when life is at its most varied, vigorous, biodiverse, can we hope to thrive. We may not know it, but we need towering forests across 1/3 of the land surface to lock away carbon and keep the climate stable. We need millions of pollinators and billions of soil organisms and megatons of plankton to keep the food we eat in supply. We need strange plants deep in jungles to create our medicines, and coral reefs and mangrove swamps to protect the coasts we depend upon. Our planet's biodiversity provides all the things we need for free. But it will only do so if there's lots of it, and at the moment it's under attack. In the last 50 years, our activities have dramatically reduced biodiversity across the globe. We've snuffed out habitats, reduced populations of wild animals by 60%, and even driven whole species extinct. The number of lions in Africa has dropped by 65%. The number of individual flying insects in Europe has dropped by 75%. The number of bluefin tuna in the Pacific has dropped by 95%. Biodiversity is dropping everywhere and fast. This is catastrophic for nature and therefore ourselves. We talk about climate change a lot, but biodiversity loss is as important an issue. How do we stop this loss of life? How do we ensure that biodiversity, our planet's vital statistic, begins to increase again? In fact, we already know exactly what to do. Follow Our Planet, visit ourplanet.com and watch the series on Netflix.
Well, that was a phenomenal video that carries a very important message. Alongside a climate crisis, we're also facing a biodiversity crisis. It reminds us of how complex our systems are and how much on all the small parts that we depend on. Also, as I introduce the first speaker, remember to use hashtag biodiversityTO. Our first speaker tonight is Sunday Harrison. Sunday Harrison is the founder and the executive director of Green Thumbs Growing Kids, a community-based nonprofit organization in downtown Toronto neighborhoods. It primarily provides programs for students to raise food on school grounds and to create recipes with it. She is absolutely passionate about garden-based learning and children's access to the natural world and healthy, fresh food. Thank you so much, Sunday, for joining us. Sunday, can you?
Hello.
Yes,
Hi.
I can hear you now.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, Amina. Yeah, so Green Thumbs is 20 years, and we're in our 21st season. We're, you know, just trying to pivot to online stuff like everybody else, even though we're, you know, we're very dedicated to experiential and outdoor learning for people from, you know, really babes in arms up to, you know, our age, all ages. So I just want to share with you tonight a project that really speaks to biodiversity in our tree canopy in the city that we're working on and that we have taken into a curbside pickup project that I'm just excited to share that with you. Here's our website, The Story of Food in the Language of Gardening. Encourage you to join. I think the chat box will have that address in there at some point. And the project itself is called Urban Trees from Seed. And really what it's looking at is biodiversity, not just among species, but within the species. And it's about having a healthy tree canopy in the city. And as such, we're very grateful to funding support from the City of Toronto Urban Forestry Grants. So why grow from seed? Well, trees that are grown in standard commerce and planted on city and private properties are generally raised from clones. And this method reduces biodiversity, which makes the species more vulnerable to pests and disease. And with climate change, we really have no idea which pests and diseases will be coming to our region. So reintroducing biodiversity in our tree canopy is highly recommended. And that's because each seed is a genetically unique individual. So zooming in on one fantastic species, we discovered that one species in particular grew really well from seed. This tree is called Kentucky coffee tree. It's planted by the City of Toronto, and apparently it's one of the most successful urban tolerant species over time. It's a native species. It's from the Carolinian region, and returning our canopy to native species helps our native pollinators, in turn helping our food system. Native species have native names. Our project aims to learn and teach the Anishinaabemowin, Ojibwe, or Kaniaka Mohawk name for various tree species, as these are two of the languages spoken historically in our region. The Anishinaabemowin word for this tree, as we have been able to learn from elders and mentors, is Bijou Atig, which refers to the shape of the pod being like a large cat's claw, and Atig means tree. So there was a relationship. The Mastodon ate the seed and pooped it out, and that's how the tree grew. And this tree was the food source. So when the Mastodon went extinct, the tree became rare. So this relationship illustrates the food web and the concepts of interdependence and symbiosis. So if you'd like to grow your own, you can be the Mastodon. We've got a whole kit for you at programs at greenthumbsto.org. And at the moment, the kit is free of charge. It contains everything you need to grow your own and an instructional video and background documents. And then we'll be happy to work with you to locate that tree in its forever home.
Thank you so much, Sunday. That was a lovely presentation, and I'm sure a lot of folks are already planning to pick up their seeds. I know I am. So up next, we have Christine Tully. Christine is going to be talking more about waters in Lake Ontario because she's the Vice President and co-founder of Swim, Drink, Fish Canada. They host projects such as Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, Swim Guide, and other water protection programs. Kristen has over 20 years experience connecting and supporting people working to restore swimmable, drinkable, and fishable water. Her favorite projects blend technology, storytelling, and an appreciation for nature to help connect people with water. Kristen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm here to talk about the Great Lakes where I live and water. Water is the foundation for all life on this planet. So as human beings, we need water to survive. And as social creatures, we need the places that water creates. Those are the beaches and the parkland, the ravines, the open lakes. Those are the spaces where we connect with nature, where we spend time with our friends and our family, and the places that help to keep us well. Our relationship to water reveals a lot about our cultures and our societies. It tells us, who has access, who gets to enjoy nature, where is water protected, where is it polluted. So when we study and learn about water, we also study and learn about ourselves. I'm in Toronto, as are many of you, and the water here is Lake Ontario, part of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are 5 big lakes, basically giant puddles formed by melting glaciers more than 10,000 years ago. Water flows from Lake Superior in the north, down through Huron and Michigan, through Lake Erie in Ontario, and then out the St. Lawrence River to the salty Atlantic Ocean. All this glacier water is a one-time gift. So are we people who appreciate this gift and protect it? I think we should be. Every minute of your day today was shaped by Lake Ontario. If you're in Toronto, if you're somewhere else, the same thing is true of your local water body. That water body, in my case, Lake Ontario, it quenched your thirst, it washed your hands, it grew your food, it powered the electronics that are in your home. If you're here in Toronto, 65% of your body is Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario sometimes has a reputation for being polluted. It's true that sewage and other problems affect water quality, but that's not what defines the lake. The lake is alive. It is full of fish and wildlife, including sturgeon that can grow to be 7 feet long and 100 years old. They don't want to eat plastic or swim in your medicine. We need to be careful about what we put down the drain, and we need to advocate for proper sewage treatment. But the best thing you could do to help the Great Lakes and any water body is to forge your own connection with the water, to go outside, experience the lake, love it, so that you can protect it. And if you're nervous about going to a beach or a park for the first time, just remember that everyone is connected to water. It's the reason we're alive. You have every right to enjoy nature. And in fact, sunshine and fresh air, the sound of water, they make your brain happy. It's not a luxury, it's science. When you're familiar with your local creek or lake, you'll have a much better appreciation for its importance, and you will be better equipped to make sure that it is protected. If you don't know where to start, don't worry. Visit the website Great Lakes Guide. It's greatlakes.guide. It has a ton of advice for first-time explorers. It also has up-to-date information about which parks and beaches are open and how you can stay safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you have any questions at all, just let me know during the Q&A or follow me and Swim Drink Fish on social media channels. We are at Swim Drink Fish. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, for that well put together reflection, and really asking the questions on how we develop our relationship to water and how we should be developing our relationship to water and people's different experiences of it. Remember to ask questions on the YouTube comments and use hashtags SwimDrinkFish and hashtag biodiversity2. Next, we have a wonderful duo, Nao and Cassie. Nao Gavord Serrano is an 11-year-old singer, songwriter, and climate activist who believes that music can provide who has been singing and performing for over 5 years. Cassie Norden is a singer, songwriter, and climate activist who believes that music can provide the strength and resilience to bring about change. Cassie and Nao met at a climate strike in March of 2019 and have been collaborating ever since. We're very excited to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
So Nao, do you want to introduce the song that we're going to sing?
Yeah. So The first song we're gonna sing is called There Was an Earth. We've sung it at a bunch of rallies. And this song was written by me and my friends. And yeah, that's really it.
So it's a repeat after me song. So Neo is going to be the lead, and I'm going to be the repeat after Neo part. So if you want to join in with my part, that would be awesome. Okay, let's go.
There was an earth.
There was an earth.
A great big earth.
A great big earth.
Whose sense of worth.
Whose sense of worth.
Was in her dirt.
Was in her dirt.
There was an earth, a great big earth, whose sense of worth was in her dirt. But then they came.
But then they came.
The human race.
The human race.
Ransacked the place.
Ransacked the place.
What a disgrace.
What a disgrace.
But then they came, the human race. Ransacked the place, what a disgrace. The kids were sad.
The kids were sad.
And got quite mad.
And got quite mad.
They stood for Earth.
They stood for Earth.
And what she's worth.
And what she's worth.
The kids were sad and got quite mad. They stood for Earth and what she's worth. So here we are.
So here we are.
We've come this far.
We've come this far.
We're skipping school.
We're skipping school.
No fossil fuel.
No fossil fuels.
So here we are. We've come this far. We're skipping school. No fossil fuel. So listen up.
So listen up.
All you grown-ups.
All you grown-ups.
Don't take away.
Don't take away.
Our future days.
Our future days.
So listen up, all you grown-ups. Don't take away our future days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassie and Neo. I love that song. I've loved it since the very first rally where I heard it. And I promised I was singing, but I spared you the disaster and muted my mic. So, folks joining us, if you're wondering how you can get more in touch with the speakers, learn about their different initiatives, the Climate Fast website, so it's Climate Fast, if you just Google that, has all the bios and links to their websites. I encourage you to do that and maybe sign up as a volunteer as well, so you can also contribute to preserving biodiversity and fighting climate change with us. I am really honored to introduce you to our next speaker, who is Carolyn Crawley. And Carolyn Crawley is a Mi'kmaq woman with mixed ancestry from the East Coast. She operates her own business, Mistnokmak, which focuses on decolonizing current interactions with the land, self, and others to build healthy and reciprocal relationships. She is also a registered holistic nutritionist. On a more personal note, Carolyn is the first person who told me with a lot of honesty, if I actually miss nature, I should stop plugging in my earphones in the city and actually be mindful of the nature that is actually around us, even in the city. So Carolyn, it's a real honor to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
Ani, bonjour, Gwegwe, Zego, Tanzi. Good evening, everyone. I first like to say, Walalio, Miigwech, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this gathering this evening. In this moment, humanity is in a time of change. Things are happening today that are shaping the future, whether it's COVID, the climate crisis, or people standing against injustices. They're all interrelated. These may feel like unsettled times, which is why it's ever so more important to deepen one's relationship with the land, waters, and beings, known as nature. Indigenous people have been in relationship with these lands, known as Turtle Island, for thousands of years. But it's also important to know or remember that all of our ancestors at one time and place on this planet we're in a deep relationship with Mother Earth. So what do I mean by that? Mi'kmaq, Mohawk, and Cree elders have taught me that there is no hierarchy between us, the lands, the waters, and all beings. We are interconnected and rely upon one another for food and shelter and medicine and clothing and meaning. It has always been important for us to be in good relationship with one another. We have tracked the changes upon the land to guide our own movements when harvesting, hunting, or fishing. Mother Earth is our teacher, our healer, our family. We make our decisions thinking many generations ahead with consideration of all beings. So it's important for me to tell you that Mother Earth is always communicating with us. She speaks an ancient language, one of the first languages, and all of our ancestors at one time understood that language. Many people still do. When I say language, it's not in words, but it's the language in sounds, such as alarm calls, or of the bird informing of what's happening on the land in the moment, or the movement on the land that's revealed through tracking or seasonal changes. We needed to understand that language for our survival, but today many people are far from that original relationship. Relationships are the foundation for everything, and being in healthy, reciprocal relationships is needed for the overall well-being of humanity as well as for Mother Earth. So how can people find their way back? Great harm has been caused to these lands, waters, and beings since the arrival of colonialism. So reconciliation is also greatly needed for the land and understanding one's place on the land with its history. But the practice of gratitude, pausing to acknowledge and feel gratitude for all of those connected to our food and that all of those who provide for us daily. Taking the time to slow down on the land, to tune into our senses, to be in the present moment. Taking the time to notice what is often missed when moving quickly on the land. Reciprocity, finding a way to give back to Mother Earth, for she provides so much unconditionally for all of us. So finding a way of what can we offer back? Maybe it's tending to the land, nurturing it in some way, spreading the seeds of native species. Also changing one's language when referencing the land is important. When we're talking about the land, the waters, and beings, words such as resources and pests and nuisance, invasive, weeds, or the word miserable, this is to describe rainy or snowy weather on a news forecast, only separates us further from this relationship. So take time to find a spot on the land. Maybe it's your backyard, your patio, maybe it's a balcony, maybe it's a park in your neighborhood or just a small parkette, and try to go to that spot consistently, at least once a week for at least 20 minutes. Take the time to get to know the land and those beings, and if there's water there. When people have an intimate relationship with the land, they are more likely to be protective as they would be with a loved one who may be harmed. Just as people prioritize spending time with family or friends or alone time, why not prioritize spending time deepening one's relationship with the land? If I wanted to get to know any one of you, I would need to spend time with you. I could not learn about you or know you from reading your resume or your bio, but it's only through spending time, quality time, in reciprocity, will I be able to recognize the sound of your voice, to recognize your scent or your energy as it enters the room. So it's important that we take the time to get to know the land and to heal those wounds. And so finding our way back, not only for our own well-being, for the well-being of Mother Earth. Science is slowly trying to catch up to Indigenous knowledge, showing the many health benefits of being in that relationship. But it's important to remember it's not about what we can get from that relationship, but also what we can offer back. Shimegwech, Walalio to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that beautiful reflection. It's definitely caused me to start thinking more about the words we use. Recently I was out gardening and we were talking about pulling out the weeds and the thorns, and so a lot to reflect about, and I'm sure many people in the audience do as well. So today we Climate Fast is hosting this event. Climate Fast is an environmental organization, and you can find, if you would like to attend more events like this, you can sign up on their newsletter at climatefast.ca, and you can also ask questions in the comment section, so please do so. Our next speaker is Madeline McDowell. Madeline McDowell, fueled by her passion for the Humber River, has given countless walks and presentations to people about the Humber River and the trees surrounding the area. She considers trees to be living, breathing witnesses of our heritage. She has received many awards, including one from the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority for her hand in the designation of the Humber as a heritage river. Thank you for joining us tonight, Madeline.
Thank you. There are some visuals that are going to come on screen as well. I live in a 94-year-old house. Okay, I live in a 94-year-old house on what was the Toronto carrying place. A 4,000-year-old Aboriginal trail and link in the trade route
Madeline?
between the...
Let me interrupt you just a second while we fix the sound. That's giving a little echo. Let's try again.
Okay, do I start from the beginning or go on?
I think I heard what you were saying. You just keep going. Thank you.
Okay, it's a 4,000-year-old Aboriginal trade route, trail and link between the trade route between the Gulf of Mexico and the North Shore copper mines of Lake Superior. Etienne Brûlé went by my door in 1615 on his way to Lake Ontario. In 1787, the British purchased the trail from the Mississaugas as an inland route to the Upper Great Lakes, safe from American attack. Surveyor Augustus Jones made this map in 1792. My home is near the Seneca site labeled Taiagon. The plaque being installed on the trail in Weston was unveiled by Carolyn King, former chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit, in 2011, with ceremonial prayers by Elder Gary Sue. Next. We are privileged to, in the Golden Horseshoe, to live in a remnant of one of the 7 black oak savannas in North America. In 1996, Gavin Miller and I inventoried 150 Aboriginal oak trees along the first 4 kilometers of the carrying place and approached the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation to name them after Tubananiquay, the daughter of Wabanose, their chief at the time of the 1787 treaty purchase. Tubananiquay would later act as a guide for surveyor Augustus Jones. Their son, Peter Jones, named Kakoaquanabi by his grandfather Wabanose, would become chief of the Mississaugas himself. He had an audience with Queen Victoria in 1839 advocating for their land rights. This grove was proclaimed by Metro Chairman Alan Tonks and York Mayor Francis Nunziata on May 3rd, 1997. Next. This proclamation was a big step in the recognition of Aboriginal and natural heritage. The ceremonies took place in Cashman Park with Chief, later Grand Chief Larry Solt, giving the blessing from the Mississaugas of the New Credit and planting a bur oak with Chairman Tonks. They really worked hard. Next. The young tree that was planted needed to be cared for. Here, 15 years later, across from the National Sites and Monuments plaque for the carrying place is the tree that they planted. The then 7-year-old boy who lived nearby it and watered it now likes to sit under it with his friends. Next. Midway in the grove stands this 25-meter tall, 300-year-old great white oak at a Jane bus stop. A young tree when Alexander Henry passed it in 1765, describing his journey down the passage, escorted by 12 Mississaugas. It was part of the canopy when Frobisher passed it in 1785 and Simcoe on September 22nd, 1793. In 1815, it witnessed Colonel Babby's return from being a prisoner of war of the Americans to become Upper Canada's Minister of Finance. It saw Bloor Danforth become a highway with streetcars and then a subway. Its 10,000-year-old gene pool is the most viable in the face of climate change. In 2009, this magnificent tree was one of the first included in the database of the Ontario Heritage Tree Alliance for its size, age, beauty, and role in history.
Well, thank you so much, Madeline. Thank you. It's always incredible to hear about this part of history, the part that as a recent settler in Canada, I didn't get to hear, and it wasn't gifted to me. And it's always important to remember that Indigenous people have been talking about their land rights for decades or centuries, and that when we benefit from the knowledge of biodiversity, we have to be ready to also advocate for their land rights at the same time. So thank you for that reminder. I'm going to welcome our next speaker today, who is Dominique Russell. And Dominique is a writer, an activist, a teacher, and the author of Kensington, I Remember, as well as Instructions for Dreamers. She lives and works in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Her poem that she will be reading is from Sweetwater, Poems for the Watershed. Dominique, welcome.
Thank you. So here's the book. And the poem is entitled Russell Creek. Russell Creek is probably the most lost stream around from Lost Rivers, Toronto, which is a catalog of all the rivers that we paved over to build Toronto. I've worn a groove, grieving a cousin, a brother, a father, a friend hit by a truck, friends hit by sorrow. Grief, I know you. You're the heart's goon, tearing wildly at clothes, punching in the gut, your hope that hooks with brass-knuckled fact. But this, rising now like a wall of water? Did I love dragonflies, salamanders, dusky wings, lady beetles? Or even noticed wild angelica, bleeding hearts, milkweed? I hated skinks and garter snakes. I chose to live in a patchwork of cement. And yet, here I am on my knees again, while my children rescue worms. I listen for something moving, something buried that could rise. And that's it.
Thank you, Dominique, for that profound poem. Next, we have our next speaker is Ambika Thaneti. Ambika Thaneti is the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for Toronto Green Community's River and Rising program and a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. She was an environmental journalist, educator, and consultant in India before coming to Canada. She organizes and leads walks for diverse groups, and her research focuses on recent immigrants and engaging them in urban forest stewardship. Welcome, Ambika.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts here today. As a recent immigrant exploring immigrant engagement in the urban forest, I find that there is immense potential to engage with and take action with immigrants and refugees from around the world. They bring with them a rich diversity of knowledge, values, experience, and natural resource perspectives that can be very beneficial for us in Canada for solving complex problems. Based on my research, as well as my work with environmental and settlement agencies, I find that there is a widespread belief that immigrants are not interested or they do not participate in environmental issues. It is often said that they're not interested because they lack time, they're trying to survive. And my question, or that they already have low carbon footprint, so they're not a suitable audience to engage with. My question is it that they do not participate because they're not interested, or is it that they are not engaged and that is why they do not participate? One of the reasons for not engaging them is I think our environmental agencies lack the skills and the necessary resources to overcome the language and cultural diversities that are required to engage with these populations. And when they are engaged, there are times that they are engaged, I won't say that. And when they are engaged, it happens to be like an one-way information giving session where these people are told what to do as if they don't know, or they're not knowledgeable, they're not aware. And there are other times when it is like a token engagement where environmental groups reach out to community organizations to engage diverse participants because that's the funding requirement for the project. Both of these ways of engagement are ineffective and not meaningful, and therefore do not lead or encourage participation by these groups in environmental issues. Your previous participants have mentioned, speakers on the Climate Fast have mentioned that immigrants are like environmentalism needs to change. The concept of environmentalism needs to change, and we need to get environmental justice and social justice issues to work together because we are a part of nature. We are not separate from it. Why do I talk about immigrants? It's from my own experience as well. And a lot of immigrants are coming today from countries where the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle, and I would add repair to it, was not a choice. It was a way of life, where walking and biking was not for recreation. It was the primary mode of transport. Where if they had yachts, they would grow fruits and vegetables and maybe plant flowers because for the birds and the bees. They would buy fresh seasonal produce directly from farmers who would bring their produce into the weekly markets in the cities from nearby villages. They have lived with shortages of water and electricity, and they know how to value them. So I don't think it is a problem that we cannot engage them in these conversations. We just need to find different ways of reaching out to them. Many of them are also coming from countries where they have lived experience of climate change and environmental disasters. That is a very valuable experience that they have. And many of them have high educational qualifications that we can utilize here. So let us not wait for an environmental crisis to happen to engage them. Let us take action to make Canada's environmental sector more inclusive and more diverse. Thank you.
Ambika, that was perfect. Thank you very much. And such a good reminder that our environmental groups are too often not reaching out enough to the populations that come to Canada and that have all the knowledge that Ambika shared with us. So thank you for that important reminder. We have now joining us today, someone that I'm really honored to introduce, who is Cheyenne Sundance. And you might have heard of Cheyenne before because she's a farmer, the founder of Sundance Harvest, and a food and community justice advocate who teaches urban farming. Along with selling her organic produce online and at the Dufferin Grove Farmers Market, Cheyenne has initiated the Liberating Lawns Yard Sharing Project, which matches prospective food growers with urban land holders. She's also a self-taught farmer out of necessity due to the lack of anti-oppressive and food justice farm-oriented schools in Ontario. Cheyenne, thank you for being with us today.
Hey there, my name is actually pronounced Cheyenne, like the tribe in Wyoming, Cheyenne. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here today. I'm going to talk a bit about Sundance Harvest because that's primarily my largest body of work that I feel like many people know me from, and then I'll talk about some of my side projects. So I'm Cheyenne, Sundance, and I run Sundance Harvest, which is a year-round farm in Toronto. It operates out of Downsview Park. Sundance Harvest is solely operated and owned by myself. I specialize in really growing a mixture of things. So in the fall and winter months, I grow salad greens such as kale, arugula, herbs, all that stuff. In the summer, I grow fruiting crops. Sundance Harvest really is, I would say, like a food justice farm, because I do center education for those who are most affected by colonialism, food insecurity, and also food injustices. So Sundance Harvest, when I do hire staff, I do really prioritize Black and Indigenous youth because they face the highest rates of food insecurity across Canada. And with Sundance Harvest, I really wanted it to be a model and even a pilot project or even a pilot urban farm that could really show folks who are part of these demographics who face the highest rates of food insecurity across Canada, ways that we can be represented in agriculture and also urban agriculture. So that's a bit about Sundance Harvest. I'm expanding, which is great. And I always hire and always pay a living wage, which is also very beneficial. I also run 2 other projects. So the other project I run is called Liberating Lawns. So what that is, it is actually sprung out of COVID. It's a yard sharing project where folks who have land, and they're called landholders, not landowners, because we live in a settler state called Canada. And then growers get matched up together. And what they get to do is actually the growers get to grow food in a yard that otherwise would have had grass. And then the landholders get a share of produce, which is really cool. And I have about 20 or 30 matches so far, which is really great. Folks are doing that. And then I also have one last project, which is actually very partnered with Sundance Harvest, which is actually called Growing in the Margins. So all of my education, all the work I really put toward providing free education for marginalized youth, who are primarily Black, Indigenous, like persons of color, queer, trans, and Two-Spirit. I actually have a weekly garden for these youth that they come and visit each week, and they get free education on farming and growing food because all those groups are actually underrepresented. So when we're really thinking about who we're seeing as a farmer, it's very, very far off than not BIPOC femmes, BIPOC queer folks, and trans folks. So really having Growing in the Margins, having a weekly garden, having a group that's anti-oppressive and supportive of these youth is actually providing an opportunity for them to get their foot in the door for urban ag. And if they get their foot in the door for urban ag, then they can actually start maybe getting more aware of the environment and biodiversity, and also different ways they can be one with earth. And I feel like that's a really important thing. Growing in the Margins, I would say, is like a really big success because every year, at least 5 youth actually get jobs within urban ag the following year. And this is simply what I actually think it's because of representation. I'm teaching the youth. I'm a BIPOC woman. I'm a young BIPOC woman who's 23 years old, teaching these youth, right? And they're seeing me farming and seeing me have a career out of it. So then therefore they can see themselves having a career out of it. And I feel like that's a pretty cool thing when you think about it. But I've spoken about a couple words so far, and I wanted to clarify. So food justice. So when I say Sundance Harvest is a food justice farm, food justice in its terminology basically means a theory and an action and really a change to dismantle oppressive food systems and also understand that some people have access to food and some people don't. And really with food justice, it's kind of different than food security because food justice looks at those oppressive systems such as colonialism and racism that actually oppress folks who would actually get fresh produce, but because of otherwise those systems, they cannot. So I would say food justice is really paramount when you're thinking about food. Not everyone has access to intergenerational wealth and land. Not everyone can just go up to their parents' cottage and become a farmer. A lot of people, a lot of low-income people, especially Black and Indigenous people, have a long history with the land that is sometimes painful. So it's very important to recognize that when we're thinking about food and growing food and also land. And then I would say the last part I'll probably chime in to talk about is like what a resilient food system really looks like. So I do urban agriculture. I've also farmed rurally for a while. I used to farm in Cuba when I was 18. And I started Sundance Harvest when I was, I think, 21. So growing food in the city, a lot of times people say, oh, well, that's more like gardening. I would say it's actually the opposite. Sundance Harvest produces enough food for about 50 families a week in a very small space, and doing it in an ecological way that respects the nature and the environment and also the waterways, because I really don't spray many pesticides. I have ladybugs, I have grasshoppers, I have all that stuff in my greenhouse. So I would say that, like, thinking about resilient food system and also thinking about our local food system in Ontario as a whole, urban agriculture is a central part of that, because the very large concentration of people live in Toronto. So if we don't have a resilient food system, I think that translates into not having good agriculture. So having good policy that advocates for agriculture and more green spaces where you can grow food is a big thing. And another thing, though, I've noticed from my years of growing food and doing advocacy work in urban ag, is that ultimately youth like myself want to have jobs in urban ag. So if they find out that the only really way they can be involved in urban ag is maybe through nonprofits or volunteer works, oftentimes they won't do it because people still have to pay their MetroPass, their hydro bills. So that is also one of the pitfalls of capitalism. But in itself, it's very important to note that, like, within urban ag in Toronto, youth can have jobs. It creates more employment. And then, of course, the final piece I feel like everyone knows, it actually helps the environment. It helps people become more aware of where the food is coming from, who's growing their food. And it can also help with issues such as migrant workers' rights. A lot of youth that grow food with me are now very passionate about these issues because they're therefore more connected to the land, and they have more of respect for food and land and where that food really comes from. So I would say those are some of the key points with growing food and the work I do. I would say that it's like very, I feel like, beneficial and great. And yeah, I would say that's about it. I can really talk about with Sundance Harvest, but I'm more than happy to answer really any Q&As. Sundance Harvest, like I said, is more of a food justice farm. So I wouldn't say it's like an overall like ecological farm as it is, but it's a bit more than that.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to double check the pronunciation of your name to get it right. So Cheyenne.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I definitely connected to the fact how important it is to see people who look like you leading the community. I know for myself, it was something that brought me a lot of comfort and also gave me confidence to start getting involved more when I saw people who I could relate to and who I saw my history with. So on that note, we will be going to a video from the UN that is extremely relevant with the issues happening all around the world.
I always find this video to be extremely moving and impactful. So thank you for bringing that up to the screen, to the Climate Fast team. So obviously we just had I'm always very moved by this video, but we just had a reminder that we can't face this alone and that we are part of nature, as our speakers have said, and we are not above it. We cannot do without it. And our next speaker, I think, knows that very much. So Lorraine Johnson will be our next speaker. And Lorraine is the author of numerous books on gardening and environmental issues. including books like on 100 Easy to Grow Native Plants for Canadian Gardens. She is a past president of the North American Native Plant Society, is active in the community gardening movement, and is an advocate for backyard hen keeping. Lorraine is currently co-writing a book on native plants and native pollinators. Good evening, Lorraine. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. So, just share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Can you see it now?
Still not.
Sorry about this.
There we go.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
So I am going to be talking about the action I'd like to speak about tonight has to do with restoring native plant biodiversity to the urban landscape, which creates resiliency in the face of climate change. And I think it's important to stress that the biodiversity crisis isn't just about losing numbers of species, it's also about losing all the relationships between species, like including humans. So the relationships between species and all life. And what we've tended to do, rather than kind of enhancing biodiversity, is what we've tended to do is to simplify the landscape, to create these monocultures of lawn, for example, or near monocultures of a really limited number of introduced plants. So one of the very valuable actions that we can take to address the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, which of course are intimately linked together, the biodiversity and the climate crisis. So one of the things we can do to address these, one of the actions we can take is to foster relationships on the land and relationships with the land. And there are many, many ways to do that. And I'm going to focus on how we can do that through gardening. And I call it gardening, but we could just as easily use other terms like cultivation or nurturing or healing or restoration or tending the earth or naturalization. There are all these different terms. I like to think of gardening as a conversation with the planet that we're having and as building a relationship with the earth and with other people. And like any good relationship, I want it to be based on respect and generosity and caring and connection and joy. So I'm going to focus particularly on native plant gardening. And the reason why is that native plants are plants that have, over this very long evolutionary timescale, developed all kinds of interrelationships and connections in a myriad of ways with all of the life and with all of the conditions of a particular place. And these all contribute to healthy ecological functioning. Now, some of these relationships, particularly the relationships between plants and pollinators, so plants and insects, some of these relationships are incredibly specific. There's this tiny sweat bee that has a narrow preference for the pollen of one particular native plant. So that species of bee, it has formed this relationship and depends on it in some ways. So there are these very specific relationships, and then there are some that are more generalized. But the point is that it's those functional relationships that we're supporting when we garden with native plants and when we return native plants to the urban landscape. And what's really great about this work, and the hopeful thing, is that when you do it, when you restore habitat, the creatures will find that habitat. Here's an example in Calgary where they restored native plants to a pollinator corridor in the city, and then a rare species of bee was discovered soon afterwards. Another really important thing about this work that makes it quite meaningful is that wherever you're doing it, And at whatever school, at whatever scale you're doing it, it's meaningful, it has value, it matters. It's definitely not just yards or gardens, but it's also boulevards and laneways and balconies and parks and school grounds and community centers and faith centers all over. And your guide can be natural processes, the way that leaves break down and restore the soil, the way that wet spots that can be planted with rain gardens infiltrate water into the and recharge the groundwater, the way that the abundance of nature, which in our aesthetic sense we might call messiness, actually is very, very important and valuable and generative. So let's find beauty in the complexity of nature. Let's recreate that beauty and biodiversity everywhere in the city. Let's create the conditions for complexity, and let's celebrate this complexity everywhere in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Next, we have, just wait for the screen. Next, we have an amazing speaker, Colin Love. He leads the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority Community Learning Team in Toronto and is the Executive Director of the Green Neighbours Network of Toronto, as well as the founder of Secondhand Sunday and a partner with Brooks Love Big Picture. Colin is a husband and a father of two who loves to spend time outdoors with his family and friends. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all virtually, and yeah, thanks for tuning in on your Friday evening to engage in this really important conversation. Thanks also actually to Climate Fast. Big round of applause here. Virtually of course, but there's a lot of back end work that goes into putting an event like this together. So thank you to Climate Fast and as well as all the speakers and like I said, everyone for tuning in. But anyways, time's ticking here, so I'm going to be very, very brief. But the two things I'd love to share if there's interest. One has to do with a pretty large scale project, right in line with what Lorraine was talking about, but involves a 16-kilometer stretch of linear green space through Scarborough called the Meadowway, which is being restored into native meadowland. And secondly, I'd love to share some resources, actually more on the personal scale, in regards to how you might be able or interested to take action if you're so inspired. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll share links, obviously, with these two resources if there's interest. But what you're seeing here is the Meadowway. So again, the Meadowway, it's 16 kilometers long. Once completed, it's actually going to be Canada's longest linear corridor, which is pretty incredible. And this obviously map doesn't do it justice. In real life, we have a 25-foot map that helps reflect this. But you can see where my mouse is here. This is sort of East Don, in Don Valley in Toronto. Obviously, the Science Center is near here. The 401 is crossing right here, and then Rouge National Urban Park right here. So it gives you a sense of the scale of this project. And what's going to happen? Well, it's going to be converted from turf graphs into an incredibly biodiverse and resilient, meadow habitat. So here's a picture here, and again, I would love to go into more details about the science and really some of the climate change benefits. Here's little teaser. What you don't see underneath the ground in terms of the incredible root length. Root structure of these native plants. You can just imagine the climate change connections there for sure in terms of sequestration, all that. But anyways, moving on. A portion of the meadow is actually complete. If you are interested in coming to check it out, it's at near Scarborough Museum, Thompson Memorial Park, when it's safe to do so, obviously. So definitely encourage people to come take a look. It is a multi-year project to be able to restore a meadow like this. Good thing is there's tons of great resources on our website, and here's a bunch of renderings that have been done that help to show, really what hopefully this is going to look like once it comes to life, this incredible project. There's also a lot of videos and all sorts of things. So anyways, switching gears, that's pretty big picture, right? An incredible project, I think, in an incredible area of Toronto, as in Scarborough. Let's talk a little bit though about, well, what you can do yourself potentially in a sense of agency, even now during this, this strange time of COVID. Toronto and Region Conservation Authority has a great initiative. It's called At Home with Nature, and I'm just linking to the webpage here. But there's resources, whether you're looking for, get your kids, engaged with nature or just general interest. There's also lots of resources here for teachers. Again, Instagram, 3 days a week. We have Facebook Lives. TRC has Facebook Lives Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, or a video to check out, all under this, theme of at home with nature. Metaway actually is on Thursday. So if anyone's particularly interested in that project, highly recommend it. And then here's this e-learning schedule of all these different events, webinars and live videos and pre-recorded videos and whatnot. Really encourage people to check out, as well as lots of resources here in terms of how you can go and get involved directly, whether it's planting a garden, growing native plants, going to birdwatch, you name it. So lots of resources there. But thanks again, Climate Fast. Thanks you all for tuning in. And there's my buzzer, so I'll flip back. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I never thought I would be this excited to see a bunch of roots appear on my screen like you just showed us, but I did. So thanks so much for sharing those 2 projects. I'm always looking for ways at home to get involved with nature, because there's this disconnect that we feel right now. And these are 2 amazing examples. So thank you again, Colin. We're going to get to the end of our session and have questions. So if you have last questions, put them in the chat right now. But before that, we do have a last performance, and music really, I think, fuels our movements, gives us the energy we need. So let's listen again to Cassie and Neo. And this time they're going to sing a song that was written for today, and it is called We Share Our Home. So thank you, Cassie and Neo, for being back with us, and take it away.
Can I start my video now? Oops, I can't start my video quite yet. Oh, now you asked me. Okay, cool. Hi. Okay, so we're going to do this. This is not quite a call and response song, but it has a chorus that is quite repetitive. And the words are, we're not alone. We share our home with all the animals, the plants, and the trees. We need them all, from big to small, to fill our skies, our land, and our seas. So that part Neo is going to sing. We're going to go back and forth so you can join along with Neo. I don't see him, but I assume he's somewhere. Oh yeah, there he is.
Original sound on, right?
Yes, it says turn off original sound. How about you? We like the original sound if we're doing music. Okay, let's go. So. The earth, it is our home, but it's never been anyone's to own.
We're not alone, we share our home with all the animals, the plants, and the trees. We need them all, from big to small, to fill our skies, our land, and our seas.
Bees pollinate so the plants can grow the food we eat from the seeds we sow. Trees dry our waste into their leaves and turn it into the air we breathe. Down in the depths, the coral reefs protect our coasts from the storms at sea. Up in the sky, the birds spread seeds that grow into the trees we need to breathe.
We're not alone, we share our home with all the animals, the plants, and the trees. We need them all, from big to small, to fill our skies, our land, and our seas.
Each species has the thing it does we need, but we don't know, because the web is wide. When you look inside, there are connections hidden to the eye. Our home has never been anyone's to own.
We're not alone, we share our home with all the animals, the plants, and the trees. We need them all, from big to small, to fill our skies, our land, and our seas.
We're not alone, we share our home with all the animals, the plants, and the trees. We need them all, from big to small, to fill our skies, our land, and our seas.
The earth, it is our home, but it's never been ones too.
Hey, thank you, Neo. Thank you,
Amazing.
everyone, for singing with us at home.
I hope Nea's okay. Okay, well, thank you, Cassie and Neo, for that beautiful song, and with a very beautiful message that we're not alone in all the work that we do. As much as we might feel that we're facing big giants, we're not alone. So, yeah, thank you for that. Next, we'll be having our Q&A. But in the meantime, you can fill out some petitions that really encourage food justice within our communities, and really go to Cheyenne's point in her discussion on Sundance Harvest about, how much we will be relying on growing our own food. So as all the panelists come on, we will be preparing for a Q&A.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody, and thanks to the folks still with us on the live stream. Amina, do you want to start by asking one of the questions that stood out for you from the...
Yes, so one question was, what sort of action can people take back that will really help, like that will appeal to the mainstream or change the mainstream in some way, and that will help challenge that. So you can raise your hand to answer that, but what's one action you can think of? Sorry, is anyone? Okay.
I think
Carolyn.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I said earlier. It's about finding one's way of deepening the relationship with the land and with the waters and with the being, and returning home to that relationship that our ancestors had. And, taking that time to prioritize that relationship, just as we value all the other relationships in our lives, to prioritize our relationship with Mother Earth in that way equally.
You're all experts. Anybody else has answers to that?
I can chime in really quick, actually, for a quick note. Although I see Madeline and others have their hand up, so I'll be very brief. But I think one of the reoccurring messages, that I've heard throughout, pretty much every speaker's presentation is, the importance of nature, but also that it's all around us already, right? And sometimes we have this sense where you have to go somewhere far or deep into wilderness or whatnot when it's right in our backyard, it's right in our balconies, it's on our windowsill, it's in our parks, it's schools. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. As we all know, we're all part of nature, but it's so good for us, both mentally and physically and cognitively. It's good for our communities, and it's all around us, even in an urban setting like Toronto. So let's take advantage.
Madeline? One second, now you're unmuted. You can.
Okay. What we really need to do is be kind to each other and to Mother Earth. Always be conscious of what is around us in the environment, and stop overusing it and abusing it.
Thank you, Madeline.
Particularly abusing it.
Ali, would you like to ask, or Ambika?
I would say, coming from, again, an immigrant perspective, is you're coming into a new country. You're coming onto indigenous lands. We need to be very careful of where we are and how we're building our relationship with it. And learning from the land, as Carolyn has mentioned, as Madeline has mentioned, several speakers have mentioned, that is of primary importance. And the feeling that the settlement sector has that immigrants are not interested in these issues is something that really needs to change. So, thank you.
Thank you, and that's true. As settlers, we know nothing of the land we're coming on, so we could harm it. We harm it much more. And so thank you for pointing that out, Ambika. I think we had Kristen as well that wanted to chime in.
I love and appreciate what others said about connecting to the land and connecting to water in our case. To that, I would just add that there's the one thing that people could do that really makes an enormous difference is changing your own perspective or expectations of what you will find when you do connect with nature, especially if you are in an urban environment. So if someone tells you that pollution is normal, you don't have to believe that. If someone tells you that you don't have a right to access the water or you don't belong in nature, you don't have to believe that. And that most powerful change that I've seen in my life and career comes from people who aren't willing to accept that things have to be the way they are. And so that as a starting point, I think is really powerful.
Thank you. Kind of going off that, another question that was recurring a few times was around waterways, because a few of you mentioned waterways, but without really talking about them precisely, and how our activities could impact waterways. So I wanted to hear more about some concrete ways, like what things do we do every day impact waterways, and in what ways specifically? Lorraine?
Yeah, I think one of the really important things that we could do that would have a great deal of impact is in every way possible, encourage the infiltration of the water that falls on the land, encourage the infiltration of that water into the land and down to the groundwater. What we've tended to do is just sort of, funnel it into pipes and sewer systems to go, off to either treatment or directly into the lake. And so the ways that we can encourage that infiltration have to do actually with permeable surfaces and planting those permeable surfaces. And what happens in natural systems is that those native plants, and let's say native wet meadow plants, they encourage the infiltration of that water down into the groundwater to replenish it. So I think if we had rain gardens all over the city, in all places, schools, community centers, libraries, yards, if we had these rain gardens, we really wouldn't need to build those big pipes that are that are being built at great expense to deal with an issue that we could deal with on a landscape scale with plants.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Madeline? You're on mute.
Oh, am I mute?
You're good now.
Okay. Further to that, the lakeshore floods regularly now, the Lakeshore Road. A decade ago, it didn't. It never flooded, but they have paved almost all of the exhibition grounds now. And so all that water that was going down into Mother Earth through the sand that was there is now flowing off onto the Lakeshore Road. We're getting ourselves. Yes.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the green roof movement will help with so many things in terms of water catchment, reducing stormwater runoff, and helping to reduce energy costs in our buildings. There has been some effort to subsidize that, but and require it even in new buildings, but I think that's an area that needs to be completely ramped up.
it's okay to build off just, another term that was thrown out there really quick related to water, particularly in an urban setting, is stormwater, right? And this is a really, pretty common misconception. I'm going to try just sharing my screen really quick. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but stormwater, it does not get treated before it enters into our natural waterways. So, here's just a simple activity sheet, but what it's showing is that the water that, comes off our roads and into our gutters, whatnot, whether it's sidewalks, streets, goes into storm drains, it's emptied directly into local waterways. There's no treatment facilities that are, that are treating that water. So you can imagine the impact on wildlife as well as us, and that gets back to the benefits of green roofs and low impact development and naturescaping and all that's been talked about, giving nature a chance to do what it does best, right? Filter up that water and clean it for us. And nature is pretty amazing that way.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that when thinking as consumers, people who are smokers, those cigarette butts that are often discarded onto the earth that eventually can wash into those waterways, or even during the winter season when people are over salting those sidewalks as well. So just having those considerations as individuals is what we can do as far as reducing those pollutants in our everyday activities.
Thank you for that. I think Kristen has been waiting for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, but the stormwater that people have talked about. So there was a question that popped up on the YouTube thread quite a while ago. I can't remember who asked it, but it's related to what we've just heard. So the reason why this untreated wastewater goes into the lakes and rivers is because that's actually how our infrastructure is designed. Our city built the pipes so that they would empty into the lake. So there is, in addition to rainwater that falls on the ground and becomes stormwater, there's a fair amount of raw sewage. So what goes down your toilet or what goes down your dishwasher or your laundry machine, a fair amount of that in places like Toronto and Vancouver and other big cities does end up in the water as well. So when I was talking earlier about thinking what you flush, we do mean quite literally that all the soaps, all the medicines, any materials that you flush or wash down a drain in these older cities are likely to end up in the water. So anything that we can do to keep garbage out of the wastewater system also keeps garbage out of our lakes and rivers, and anything we can do to keep stormwater in the ground in our gardens where it belongs, it also helps to reduce the pressure on those pipes.
Thank you for that. So we're going to ask one more question to help us wrap up. And it's about food and products. So some of it has already been addressed with the conversations we've had, but can you provide tips on how changes to consumptions of food and products can help restore biodiversity? So just, yeah.
Sunday?
I don't know if it's an end product, but one of the contributions of urban gardeners is seed saving and bringing heritage varieties back into the mainstream and making sure that we don't lose them, because monoculture in the conventional agriculture system relies on a very, very small percentage of varieties available. So it's really important, and the seed library is the way to share that and grow them out and share the seed for next year. So I think that can't be underestimated in terms of our food biodiversity.
Thank you.
Other responses? This feels like my online learning classes sometimes.
I'm happy to chime in until someone else raises their hand. But I think food systems in general, as Cheyenne talked about, and as well as others. I mean, there's so many different issues that related to sustainability, related to biodiversity, climate change that could really be focused on. But maybe that in itself is a bit of something to think about. Is just learning, right? We're all interested in different things. We're all passionate about different things, and taking the time to educate oneself and others and our family members and friends, right? Because we know how important it is that the messenger when it comes to talking about these sort of really complicated issues, and really making decisions related to food systems that are meaningful to you, right? Local, organic, growing yourself, right? Supporting, non-GMO. Like, there's just so many different angles you could take that all connects to biodiversity and climate change, because the world is connected. If there's anything we know, everything's connected to everything else. That's Ecology 101, right? But anyways, it's just my 2 cents is to take action after learning and sharing, talking about it with your friends and family, I think is essential. So.
Thank you. Carolyn, yeah.
It's not so much about food products, but when I think of when people are gardening, really avid gardening, part of a.
I think your mic might be a little off.
Oh.
I can't hear you very well.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's not so much about food products, but when I'm thinking about people who are avid gardeners or earth workers, tending to the land, growing food, thinking about those other plants that are popping up that weren't intentionally planted there by human hands, per se. Those plants that are often labeled as weeds, as invasive, because many of those plants, with creation, from an Indigenous perspective, we say that every being has a role. And, many of those plants that might be popping up in the garden might be food sources. They might be medicine or be for other utilitarian purposes. And so instead of just pulling them out with no regard, taking that time and that care, because we do when harvesting those tomatoes or other foods that have been intentionally planted by people, taking as much care to remove those particular plants that we might not want in our garden in a good way, and finding a way to use those plants instead of just quickly discarding them into the compost. For us to take that responsibility to find out, who is this plant? What's the relationship of this plant with other beings? Because, some of those plants could be fixing the soil, and many of those plants that are intentionally grown there that are food sources have much more nutrients than anything that is planted. The cat roots go down up to 100 to 200 feet deep, bringing up those trace minerals. So finding a different way of being in relationship with those plants that are coming up in our garden.
Right. Beautiful. Well, folks, except if someone else has a pressing one, we're gonna kind of wrap up. And what we do usually in our youth group meetings is we like to have a checkout question to have everybody speak, and also usually it's a somewhat fun question. We try to make them fun. So obviously this one is going to be obvious, but I want to hear what your favorite species of living being is. Now, it can be a plant, it can be an animal, it can really be whatever you want, but we'd love to hear a few words on what it would be and why, to get us to start knowing a little more nature and the species around us. So anybody that wants to start, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll just go around in the speakers. Don't be shy. Carolyn.
I would say the water. Water is that giver of life, medicine. Water flows within us. Before we're birthed into this world, we were encased in that fluid, that water, within our mother's womb. And when we're in grief, we shed water, tears. And so when we're thinking about that water, finding a way to be in relationship with that water. If we ever have grief that comes and we're letting our tears, just let them flow. There's no shame in grief. In fact, releasing that grief is healthy. And when we're releasing those tears, to take in that water, replenish the water that we've lost from our bodies. And maybe just kind of be consciously aware and maybe offering some gratitude when we take that water into our life. Like, she flows within us and around us.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Was it Madeline?
I agree. Water is the most precious thing that we have got on the planet. It is life, and we have got more of it here in Ontario and the Great Lakes area. Not just the surface water in the lakes and rivers, but underground as well. We have more than any place else on the planet. We do not look after it well. We need to look after it much better and water is the gift of life. It should be free. I have a sign in my front yard says, "Say no to Nestle's," because they are pumping groundwater in vast quantities and selling it. Water, nobody should pay for water other than the simple services that you have to pay for with your city taxes.
Thank you. The sign I have up there, Save Our Water, was from a protest against Nestle taking over water sources. Kristen?
I'm going to shock everyone who knows me and say otter, because they are so much fun and they basically just play all day long, but also because they used to live in the Don River and the Don River Valley. And so to me, otter are the symbol of what a restored Toronto would look like, because otter eat fish, which means that they can only survive and play and make their little mudslides in a place where they have food, and they can only eat food if the fish can survive in the river, and the river has to be clean and has to be healthy. So the day when we see otter playing in the Don River Valley again is the day that we know that we've won back Toronto's waters.
Thank you. Yeah, Lorraine.
It's impossible to pick a favorite species, but I just want to say that for me, trees are, they're just incredible beings, and especially the oak trees, which support the greatest number of caterpillars anyway, insects, moth and butterfly, larvae. The oaks support more than pretty much any other species of tree in this area anyway. So oaks are pretty fabulous.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Colin?
Sure, I can jump in. So like many parents and caregivers during this time, I imagine I'm not alone in spending a lot of time with young kids in creative play, which is lots of fun. So my daughter loves nothing more than to pretend to be animals. So my go-to animal these days usually is a red-tailed hawk, and it's an incredible bird of prey, native obviously to our area. You hear them and you can see them, and actually the sound always reminds me, back in leading nature walks for years now, but it's sometimes referred to as the Hollywood bird, because it's such a common call. It's so majestic. It's used in movies and TV shows all the time to show any type of bird of prey, eagles or falcons, just because the sound is so just powerful. So keep an eye out, red-tailed hawks. They're all over the place. They're incredible bird, and yeah, great question. Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. We actually see them at every single protest we have at Queen's Park, and we notice every time.
Yeah.
Ambika or Sunday, maybe? We're good here.
I don't know too much about the different species here. Again, I won't be able to choose based on what is the best, but if I had to go back, I would choose the tiger from India, because that's like the umbrella species for saving large areas. It's a majestic animal, it's a beautiful animal, and if we can protect it, water, soil, land, trees. So I would go back to that, and maybe relevant here could be the caribou or the bear, any of the big animals, if we can saving a large area. So for me,
I love that answer. Great. Sunday, go for it.
Well, somewhere in between the last two, I love trees. They are the most successful plants on the planet. But for getting through COVID era, it's my fur babies, my cats, that I'm really glad to have to hug and pet and things like that. So I got to put in a word for the felines, the domestic felines.
Well, thank you so much to all of you, and thank you very much for everybody that has been watching. Amina, I don't know if you want to answer that question, but I know you want to say a few words before we close.
Oh, well, I just wanted to again thank you for attending, to all our speakers here today for sharing such valuable knowledge that people can take home and reflect on. And also wanting to thank people in the beginning for making some sort of commitment to racial justice and to being anti-racist. And I think that's something that I hope people will carry on from today. With achieving biodiversity or with addressing any crisis, remembering those that are marginalized, those that are vulnerable, those that are most vulnerable. So I think those are my last words, though. And also thank you the organizers who've done a fabulous job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Round of applause for the organizers. There's a tech team behind the scene. There's people that thought of all these wonderful speakers. And Amina, it was a pleasure to co-host with you. And thank you to all our speakers, to our viewers. And we hope that you have a lovely rest of the evening and to see you all soon, probably digitally first, and then back in the streets or in nature in Ontario. Have a good evening.